What's going on, Team Icon, and welcome to another live stream. So today, I'm going to be covering breathing and rest times, right? Now, to kick off this live, I want to talk about two things, okay, that are going to come up throughout this whole live stream. One is ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, which is essentially, I want you to think of this as your body's energy stores. Okay, so ATP is required to actually exert any sort of force, right? The second thing is your VO2 max. And your VO2 max is essentially the measure of which, how much oxygen, like the maximum amount of oxygen your body can actually use during intense exercise. Now, why are these two things important? Well, ATP, like I aforementioned, is your body's form or currency of energy, okay? So that takes time to replenish, which is going to tie into the rest times between each kind of like category or tier of training, right? Specifically more towards lifting. And your VO2 max, okay, or you could think of it as your cardio, is going to have a direct correlation with your training as well, because even when it comes to lifting, you got to think about what you're doing when you're trying to target strength, okay? If you're trying to do a heavy set, essentially what you're doing is you're intaking as much oxygen as you can with any given repetition within that set, and you're trying to brace extremely hard at keeping everything tight as you perform that repetition, right? So you can imagine that having a higher VO2 max is going to have a direct correlation with being able to lift heavier and essentially recover faster in between sets as well. So with that being said, when it comes to breath work, right, I think most people know that when you're on the concentric, or like when you're pushing or exerting force, right, that is when you're going to be exhaling your air. And then on the eccentric, or the negative aspect of any lift, you're actually going to be intaking air, right? So a nice little analogy I like to use, which is something that I learned way back in Taekwondo, is when you look at any sort of martial artist, when they exert, like they throw a punch, they go ha, or they throw a kick, they go ha, right? That is when you're supposed to be exhaling your air because you're exerting force. Now, on the negative or the eccentric portion of whatever you're doing, any bout of physical activity, you're going to be inhaling your air, right? Because that's almost like a rest time, but not really a rest time, because especially when it comes to lifting, you still want to keep tension in your body. You still want to keep tight. Now, that being said, okay, when it comes to breathing, especially during sets, I find that, over my past decade of experience in the fitness industry, I've come to learn that 7 out of 10 people will actually hold their breath during any given set, okay, in between each repetition. Now, that's bad because your body actually needs oxygen to exert force, right, and to recover. So it's kind of like a two-edged sword there, where if you're holding your breath during a set, you're not going to be able to maximize your output, okay, and then you're actually delaying the recovery process during your rest period in between that set. So it's annoying as hell, but getting into the habit of intaking air and exhaling air throughout your repetitions is very, very, very important, okay? Now, I'm going to use an example of a set of 10 bench press, right? You're on the bench press and you're doing 10 repetitions on that bench press. Even if it means you're only taking 5 breaths, so in between every 2 reps, let's say you take your breath at the top, even if you're doing that, that's going to be better than you kind of blindly holding your breath and then just taking air whenever you actually need to, right? When your body's forcing you to. Getting a little bit more regimented in your breathing techniques during your sets, I promise you, is going to make all of the difference. Now, in between rest times, this is where, obviously in between rest time, you have to breathe or you're going to die. But being very intentional of how deep you're breathing, okay? And B, how controlled the exhale is, okay? And why it's important to actually control the exhale is because what you're trying to do in between sets is regulate your heart rate, okay? So if you've ever seen me training in live, like in person, sometimes you might catch me taking my pulse and counting the repetitions of how many beats are going in between 15 seconds, and then I multiply by 4. But what I'm doing there is gauging my heart rate to see once it comes back down to kind of baseline. Okay, and that's how I'm gauging whether or not I'm recovered enough to go into my next set. I'm always working within heart rate ranges, right? So having that controlled breathing and that intentional breathing in between sets is imperative. Okay, it's imperative for recovery, because if you're just kind of blindly not paying attention to your breath and just allowing the rest time to kind of elapse, you're not going to maximize how fast you can actually recover within that rest time. Okay, now segueing into rest times, there's kind of 3 different categories that I put together in regards to rest times. Okay, and again, this is all pertaining to strength training or weight training or lifting weights, however you may. Now, the first category is going to be like more muscular endurance or cardio-based sets, right? So anything from, I'm going to say 15 repetitions and onward is going to be quote unquote cardio, okay? Now, your rest time in between these sets shouldn't be longer than 60 seconds. Okay, typically I don't recommend anything less than 30 seconds, because especially if you're doing a set of 15, you want to make sure you're giving your body a sufficient amount of time to actually recover from that set. But you don't want to exceed about a minute, okay? Because if your main focus is to increase your cardio, your muscular endurance and overall cardio, then you need to give yourself less rest times, okay? So for the first tier, or muscular endurance cardio-based lifting, you're going to take 30 to 60 seconds of rest. Okay. Now, in the second tier is more like muscle building or hypertrophy. Okay. Or sets of 6 to, I'm going to say, about 12. Okay. You could even run that range up to 15, but typically, like for me personally, my hypertrophy sets don't go above 12. Accessories sometimes will hit 15. But within the hypertrophy range, you want to be taking from 60 to 90 minutes, okay? You could take up to 2 minutes, but then you're kind of teetering between the fine line of hypertrophy or muscle building and strength, okay? Now, this all correlates with the first tier as well, because the better muscular endurance you have, the higher your muscular endurance is, the better your cardio is, the faster you're going to be able to recover during hypertrophy sets, okay? Because I hate cardio as much as the next individual, but believe you me, I've really been able to outline the benefits, not just for overall health, but also for my lifts, okay? So that second tier is hypertrophy sets, and you're gonna wanna be taking from 60 to 90 seconds of rest in between those sets, okay? On the top end, if you need to take 2 minutes, take 2 minutes. Now the last, but definitely not the least, is strength sets. So anything from 1 repetition all the way up to 5 repetitions, okay? That's usually the range of which you're doing reps for strength, to build strength, okay? Once you get into the 6 and beyond, now again, you're going into the hypertrophy range, right? And then from 15 and beyond, you're going into the cardio or muscular endurance range. So when it comes to strength sets, this is where I see people kind of like fall shy of their rest times the most, because I know personally, I struggled with this a lot until I started working with my powerlifting coach, Jimmy, and he actually forced me to take the rest. Even if I felt rested after, a minute and a half or 90 seconds, he forced me to take 2 to 5 minutes rest, okay? So when it comes to strength sets, again, repetitions 1 to 5 in a set, you're gonna take rest from 2 to 5 minutes. Now that's gonna be pertaining to, again, how much muscular endurance you have, how good your cardio is. That's all gonna play a role. But that only means that if your muscular endurance is lower, your cardio capabilities are not, are a little bit lower as well, you're gonna need to take more rest, right? And essentially what you're doing in this rest time, especially pertaining to the hypertrophy and the strength aspects of rest times, you're trying to restore your ATP, okay? And that's why I was mentioning earlier on, understanding that ATP is your body's energy currency is very important, because now once you understand that, all of the scientific literature that I've ever read states that in strength sets, so from like 80 to 90% of your 1 rep max, you need a minimum of 3 minutes rest to restore your ATP to like near full. All right. And now there's a big difference there, right? Where if you feel ready is different versus if you are actually ready. So again, just to kind of reiterate the rest times, the top tier is going to be muscular endurance or cardio, right? And you're going to take 30 to 60 seconds of rest. The second tier is going to be hypertrophy or muscle building, right? From 6 to about 12 repetitions on the top end 15. And there you're going to be taking 60 to 90 seconds of rest on the top end if you really need it, 2 minutes. And then the last tier is going to be strength-based sets. So from 1 repetition all the way up to 5 repetitions, you're going to need anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes of rest, okay? And this is going to take time to actually start to gauge and understand. But then going back to the whole, having more muscular endurance and better cardio aspect of things, if you remember at the start of the live, I mentioned that your VO2 max is essentially just how much oxygen your body can utilize during intense workout, right? So then that being said, there is a direct correlation with having better cardio and having a higher VO2 max. Excuse me. And when you have a higher VO2 max, even in your strength sets, it's going to benefit you because now you can intake more oxygen, brace under more oxygen, and ultimately be able to move a heavier load. All right. So that is today's live. It looks like I clocked it in about 10 minutes. Sorry if I motor mouth, but I wanted to get through this in a timely manner and not bore you guys. Okay, because I know a lot of this scientific stuff can get a little bit boring. So I try to dumb it down as much as possible and make it as relatable to your specific fitness journey as humanly possible. So for those of you that tuned in live, God bless you. For the rest of you, I do hope you catch this on the replay because this is a lot of very important information. And I know for me personally, if I had actually, had somebody teach me this earlier on in my fitness journey, it would have expedited my progress by years, right? So for now, Coach Cruz logging off because I got a lot of work to do and I got to have lunch. So peace, love, and all the protein. May the gains be with you.